The Zorathian Empire was a sprawling dominion of crystalline spires and molten rivers, its cities carved into the jagged faces of asteroids, and its warships prowling the void like predators. It was a civilization built on strength, where power was measured in the ability to crush one's enemies and dominance was the only currency that mattered. The Zorathians themselves were towering figures, their chitinous exoskeletons glistening under the light of their twin suns, their multiple limbs capable of tearing through steel. They were a species bred for war, and their king, Zorith the Unyielding, was the embodiment of their ideals. A warrior whose name was whispered in fear across the galaxy. But even the mightiest empires have their weaknesses, and for Zorith, it was his daughter, Princess Lyra. Lyra was an anomaly among her kind. Where her father's carapace gleamed with the luster of polished obsidian, hers was a dull, almost fragile gray. Her limbs, though slender and graceful, lacked the raw power expected of a Zorathian royal. In a society that revered strength above all else, Lyra was seen as a disappointment, a flaw in the otherwise unbroken line of Zorathian rulers. The court whispered behind her back, calling her the broken princess. And even her father, though he loved her in his own way, could not hide his shame. It was this shame that drove Zorith to seek an unconventional solution. If his daughter could not be strong by Zorathian standards, perhaps she could be strong by another's. And so, he turned his gaze to the most unlikely of species, humans. Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic stage, their homeworld a pale blue dot on the fringes of civilized space. They were small, soft-skinned, and lacked the natural weapons of many other species. But they were also resourceful, adaptable, and, most importantly, relentless. It was this reputation that led Zorith to Earth, where he found John Carter. John was a man who had seen too much and done even more. A former soldier, he had spent years honing his skills in the harshest environments Earth had to offer. Deserts, jungles, frozen tundras. He had survived not through brute strength but through ingenuity, endurance, and an unshakable will. When Zoritha's emissaries approached him with an offer to train the princess, John was skeptical. But the promise of a new challenge, and the chance to prove humanity's worth, was too enticing to refuse. The journey to Zorith was a blur of hyperspace jumps and alien landscapes. John spent the time studying what little information he could find about the Zorathians, their culture, and their expectations. By the time he arrived at the capital, a sprawling fortress of black stone and glowing veins of molten ore, he had a plan. It was a risky one, but then so was everything else about this endeavor. The court's reaction to his arrival was less than welcoming. The Zorathians eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, their mandibles clicking in disapproval. John, for his part, stood his ground, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He was used to being the underdog, and he knew how to turn that to his advantage. When he was finally brought before Zorith, the king loomed over him like a mountain, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "You are the human," Zorith said, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "The one they say can teach strength." "I can teach her how to be strong," John replied, his voice steady. "But it won't be the kind of strength you're used to." Zoritha's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he gestured to a figure standing in the shadows. Lyra stepped forward, her movements hesitant, her gaze downcast. She was smaller than John had expected, her carapace dull and unremarkable. But there was something in her eyes, a spark of defiance, a flicker of potential. John nodded to her, a small gesture of respect. "Princess," he said, "I'm here to help you. But this won't be easy." Lyra's response was barely audible. "Nothing ever is." The first days of training were grueling. John started with the basics: endurance, agility, and mental resilience. He pushed Lyra to her limits, forcing her to run obstacle courses, climb sheer cliffs, and endure hours of meditation. The Zorathian court watched with growing skepticism, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. Even Lyra began to doubt, her frustration boiling over during one particularly intense session. "This is pointless," she shouted, throwing down the weights she had been lifting. "I'll never be strong like them." I'll never be what my father wants. Jon knelt beside her, his voice calm but firm. You're right. You'll never be like them. But that doesn't mean you can't be strong. You just have to find your own way. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hope. And what if I can't? Then you keep trying, Jon said. Until you do. It was a turning point. Slowly, Lyra began to embrace Jon's methods, her movements becoming more confident, her determination growing stronger. She discovered that her smaller size and lighter frame gave her an advantage in speed and agility, and she began to use that to her advantage. Jon introduced her to Earth's martial arts, teaching her how to use an opponent's strength against them. He showed her how to think strategically, to anticipate her enemies' moves and exploit their weaknesses. The court's skepticism began to wane as they saw the changes in Lyra. She was still not as physically imposing as her peers, but there was a new strength in her, a quiet confidence that had been absent before. Even Zorith began to take notice, though he said nothing. The real test came during a training exercise. Lyra was pitted against one of the court's strongest warriors, a hulking brute named Kral. The match was supposed to be a formality, a demonstration of Kral's dominance. But Lyra had other plans. From the start, she used her speed to stay out of Kral's reach, darting in and out of his attacks. When he lunged at her, she sidestepped and used his momentum to send him crashing to the ground. The court watched in stunned silence as Lyra, the broken princess, outmaneuvered her opponent with ease. When Kral finally conceded, the silence was deafening. Jon allowed himself a small smile. Not bad, he said, but we're just getting started. Lyra looked at him, her chest heaving, her eyes shining with a newfound determination. What's next? Jon's smile widened. Next, we show them what you're really capable of. The section ends with Lyra's first major victory, a moment of triumph that hints at her potential but leaves room for further growth. The court's skepticism has been shaken, but not entirely dispelled, and Jon's methods have proven effective, though the challenges ahead are far from over. The stage is set for the next phase of Lyra's journey, with the promise of greater trials and even greater rewards. The Zorathian capital buzzed with anticipation as the galaxy-wide tournament approached. The event, held once every decade, was a spectacle of strength and skill, where warriors from across the stars gathered to prove their might. For the Zorathians, it was more than a competition. It was a display of their dominance, a reminder to the galaxy that they were not to be trifled with. This year, however, the tournament held a different significance. It was Princess Lyra's chance to prove herself, not just to her people, but to her father. Jon watched as Lyra trained, her movements fluid and precise. She had come a long way since their first session, her once hesitant steps now confident strides. Her carapace, though still dull compared to her peers, gleamed with the sweat of her effort. She was faster, stronger, and more determined than ever, but Jon knew that the tournament would be her greatest challenge yet. Remember, he said as she practiced a series of strikes, this isn't about brute force, it's about strategy. Use your speed, your agility. Make them underestimate you, then prove them wrong. Lyra nodded, her focus unwavering. I know. I can't afford to fail. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. You won't. You've got everything you need. You just have to believe it. The day of the tournament arrived, and the arena was a cacophony of sound and color. Alien species of every shape and size filled the stands, their cheers and jeers echoing through the air. The Zorathian court occupied the central box, their carapaces glinting in the light of the twin suns. Zorith sat at the center, his expression unreadable as he watched the proceedings. Lyra stood at the edge of the arena, her heart pounding in her chest. She had trained for this moment, but the reality of it was overwhelming. The other warriors loomed around her, their massive forms casting long shadows. She felt small, insignificant, but then she caught sight of Jon in the crowd. He gave her a nod, his expression calm and confident. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her first opponent was a hulking brute from the Croxan system, his muscles rippling beneath his thick hide. He sneered at her as they faced off, his voice a low growl. "You're the Zorathian princess? I expected more." Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she focused on his movements, her eyes tracking every twitch of his muscles. When the signal to begin sounded, he charged at her, his massive fists swinging. Lyra dodged with ease, her smaller size giving her an advantage. She darted around him, landing quick, precise strikes that left him stumbling. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she outmaneuvered him, her movements a blur of speed and precision. When he finally fell, the silence was deafening. The next match was against a warrior from the VRYLL Collective, a species known for their telepathic abilities. Lyra had never faced an opponent like this before, and she felt a flicker of doubt. But John's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay focused. Trust your instincts." The VRYLL warrior's attacks were mental, waves of psychic energy that threatened to overwhelm her. But Lyra had trained for this. She closed her eyes, blocking out the distractions, and focused on her breathing. When she opened her eyes, she saw the warrior's movements as if in slow motion. She dodged his attacks with ease, her mind clear and focused. When she finally struck, it was with a precision that left him stunned. With each victory, the crowd's skepticism turned to awe. Lyra was unlike any warrior they had seen before, her strength not in her size or power, but in her speed, her agility, her mind. Even the Zorathian court, once so dismissive, began to take notice. Zorath watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and something else, something that might have been regret. The final match was against Kral, the same warrior Lyra had defeated in training. He had been watching her progress with growing anger, his pride wounded by her earlier victory. When they faced off in the arena, his eyes burned with hatred. "You think you're strong?" he snarled. "You're nothing but a weakling, a disgrace to your kind." Lyra didn't respond. She simply stood her ground, her expression calm. When the match began, Kral charged at her with all his strength, his fists swinging wildly. But Lyra was ready. She dodged his attacks with ease, her movements fluid and precise. She used his own strength against him, her strikes landing with pinpoint accuracy. When he finally fell, the crowd erupted in cheers. Lyra stood in the center of the arena, her chest heaving, her carapace glistening with sweat. She had done it. She had proven herself not just to her people but to herself. The crowd chanted her name, their voices a thunderous roar. John watched from the sidelines, a proud smile on his face. He had always known she had it in her, but seeing her succeed was more than he had hoped for. As she stepped out of the arena, he met her with a nod. "Not bad," he said, "but we're just getting started." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with a newfound confidence. "What's next?" John's smile widened. "Next, we show them what you're really capable of." The section ends with Lyra's triumph in the tournament, a moment of victory that solidifies her place as a warrior and sets the stage for the challenges to come. The court's skepticism has been shattered, but the true test lies ahead, as the galaxy begins to take notice of the broken princess and the human who trained her. The promise of greater trials and even greater rewards looms on the horizon, leaving the reader eager to see what comes next. The victory in the tournament had changed everything. Lyra was no longer the broken princess. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to what could be achieved through determination and ingenuity. The Zorathian court, once so dismissive, now regarded her with a mixture of awe and respect. Even her father, Zorath the Unyielding, seemed to see her in a new light, though his pride remained guarded, his emotions locked behind a wall of stoic silence. But the galaxy was not a place that allowed for complacency. As Lyra's star rose, so too did the shadows that sought to extinguish it. Rumors began to spread of a rival faction, the Krylos Dominion, amassing forces on the fringes of Zorathian space. They were a brutal and cunning enemy, known for their ruthless tactics and insatiable hunger for conquest. Their leader, a warlord named Vrax, had long coveted the Zorathian Empire's resources and saw Lyra's rise as an opportunity to strike. John was the first to sense the danger. His years of military experience had honed his instincts, and the reports from the outer colonies set off alarms in his mind. He approached Zorith with his concerns, but the king's response was dismissive. "The Krylos are scavengers," Zorith said, his voice a low rumble. "They would not dare attack us directly." "They might if they think we're vulnerable," Jon countered. "Lyra's success has shaken things up. They'll see it as a sign of weakness." Zorith's mandibles clicked in irritation, but he said nothing. Jon knew better than to push further. Instead, he turned his attention to Lyra. "We need to be ready," he told her. "This isn't just about training anymore. This is real." Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "What do? "We prepare," Jon said. "And we fight." The first signs of the invasion came in the form of distress signals from the outer colonies. The Krylos struck with precision, their ships descending like a swarm of locusts, leaving destruction in their wake. The Zorathian military, caught off guard, struggled to mount an effective defense. The court was thrown into chaos, their confidence shattered by the suddenness of the attack. Zorith called an emergency council, his voice a thunderous roar that silenced the room. "We will crush them," he declared. "They will regret the day they dared to challenge us." But Jon knew it wouldn't be that simple. The Krylos were too well organized, their tactics too calculated. He approached Lyra after the meeting, his expression grim. "This is it," he said. "This is what we've been training for." Lyra's eyes burned with determination. "What's the plan?" Jon laid out a strategy, one that played to Lyra's strengths and exploited the Krylos' weaknesses. They would use her speed and agility to outmaneuver the enemy, striking where they least expected. It was a risky plan, but it was their best chance. The battle for the Zorathian capital was a chaotic maelstrom of fire and fury. The Krylos' ships descended from the sky, their weapons raining destruction on the city below. The Zorathian defenders fought valiantly, but they were outmatched by the enemy's numbers and tactics. It was clear that conventional methods would not be enough. Lyra and Jon led a small strike force, their mission to infiltrate the Krylos command ship and disable their leader, Vrax. The journey was fraught with danger, the streets of the capital a war zone of collapsing buildings and raging fires. But Lyra moved with a confidence born of her training, her movements swift and precise. Jon followed close behind, his experience guiding them through the chaos. When they reached the Krylos command ship, they found it heavily guarded. Lyra took the lead, her speed and agility allowing her to slip past the enemy's defenses. Jon provided cover, his weapon firing with deadly accuracy. Together, they fought their way to the heart of the ship, where Vrax awaited. The warlord was a towering figure, his carapace a deep, menacing black. He sneered as they entered, his voice a low growl. "The broken princess and her human pet. How quaint." Lyra didn't respond. She simply charged, her movements a blur of speed and precision. Vrax was strong, his strikes powerful enough to shatter stone, but Lyra was faster. She dodged his attacks with ease, her strikes landing with pinpoint accuracy. Jon provided support, his weapon keeping Vrax off balance. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the sounds of clashing carapace and the hum of energy weapons. But Lyra's training paid off. She used Vrax's strength against him, her movements fluid and precise. When she finally landed the decisive blow, the warlord fell, his body crumpling to the ground. With Vrax defeated, the Krylos forces fell into disarray. The Zorathian defenders seized the opportunity, pushing the enemy back and reclaiming the city. The battle was won, but the cost was high. The capital lay in ruins, its once gleaming spires now shattered and broken. In the aftermath, Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, her carapace scorched and battered but her spirit unbroken. Zorith approached her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of the battle hanging heavy in the air. Then, to everyone's surprise, Zorith bowed his head. "You have proven yourself," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are strong not just in body, but in spirit. You are worthy of the throne." Lyra's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly composed herself. "Thank you, Father," she said, her voice steady. "But this isn't just my victory. It's ours." Zorith nodded, a rare smile touching his mandibles. Indeed, John watched from a distance, a proud smile on his face. He had always believed in Lyra, but seeing her rise to the occasion was more than he had hoped for. As the Zorathians began to rebuild, he knew that their journey was far from over. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and there would always be new challenges to face. But for now they had won, and that was enough. The section ends with Lyra's triumph over the Krylos and her father's acknowledgement of her strength. The battle has solidified her place as a leader, but the challenges ahead are far from over. The promise of future trials and the ever-present threat of new enemies leaves the reader eager to see what comes next, while the satisfying conclusion of this chapter provides a sense of closure and accomplishment.